Bungie just dropped an absolute bombshell of weapon changes in the latest weapon tuning preview, so naturally, everybody's been wondering what will be the new meta in Lightfall. Really, when it comes to figuring out the meta, all that really matters is that you know the best weapons to run going into the raid race. And when dealing with raid bosses, the two most important pieces of information that you can have are going to be values for a weapon's DPS and their total damage output. So in this video, I'm going to be going over the changes we received for each major weapon type used for damage, and then getting realistic values for both DPS and total damage output. I tested a ton of different combos, weapons, and even some abilities for this video. It took a bunch of time, so if you guys do enjoy the video and haven't already, make sure to drop a like and sub down below. And I do also stream over on Twitch a bunch, doing endgame PvE activities, if you guys want to drop a follow over there too. Starting off with major changes that we're getting first though, first and foremost, linear fusion rifles are getting a 15% nerf. In my opinion, this is super small and probably won't be enough. Sleeper and Queenbreaker will also not be affected by this. Machine guns got a 10% damage boost and a 20 to 50% reserve boost. Basically, if something has smaller base reserves, it is closer to a 50% increase now, and those with decent reserves already are going to get that smaller increase. This should affect Grand Overture's damage, but not Xenophage. Heavy GLs are getting a 20% damage boost, which is super solid. I don't think this is going to be enough to make them the meta option though, at least a standout option amongst others. And then lastly, using kinetic special weapons, we will now be hitting 10% harder against unshielded enemies. Originally, we were dealing 5% more damage, now it's going to be 15% more. Vice Stinger did also get nerfed, so that does make Viced LFRs much less preferable, if that ends up being the main reason that you choose to use one versus another. There were some additional changes to exotics like 1K, which might actually make a decent difference in damage values, but I can't test those yet, so we will have to wait and see. And then also, for the purpose of the testing in this video, I will not be adding in Phantomite into any calculations, nor buffs or debuffs. We do know Phantomite is going to now be a 22% max increase, but I don't think it has been confirmed to still stack with other buffs. And we do also know that the damage increases with 3 copies, but we don't know how much we get at 2 copies. So right now, it is impossible to say if we will be able to min-max these mods for more optimal DPS rotations without knowing this value yet. Essentially, if we were to have something like Izzy plus Wendigo, it might be optimal to have 2 copies of Arc Phantomite and then 1 copy of Kinetic Phantomite, or it might be more optimal to just do all on one versus the other. Let's start off with the baseline damage of each weapon, going in order of what I'm covering. And when it does come to weapon swapping rotations, I will always be using Izinagi's Burden, but I will show the Arbalest damage value so that you guys can do the math if you think that's more optimal. Sprinting through everything, Izinagi's Burden at ×4 Honed Edge with Catalyst hits right now for 100,736 damage. RB currently hits for 44,125, and then Cartesian, which I also tested for a specific reason, which I will be going over later, hits for 39,582 across all 9 bolts. Cataclysmic with Bait and Switch proc hits for 69,747. Hothead with Explosive Light, which is the best damage perk if optimized, hits for 116,138. And then if you add in Wolfpack rounds, this will be another 32,536 damage. And then Sleeper Simulant, which is also going untouched, hits for 84,964. Anarchy ends up dealing tick damage, which lasts 10 seconds, dealing damage every half second, which is 20 times in total. There's also a detonation at the very end, and having 2 on at the same time maxes your damage out. So in total, this is going to hit for 170,620 damage across all 20 ticks for just 2 bolts. And when these detonate, they're going to be dealing another 3,032 damage each. Moving on to Wendigo with Spike Grenades, this hits for 35,946 damage at base, and then this goes up to 51,908 damage with Explosive Light applied. Grand Overture hits a base shot for 18,279 damage, and then a missile for 17,111 damage. But do note that these missiles can vary in damage, and this is the highest value I was able to get. Lastly, for testing, throwing 2 fusion grenades, these deal 76,661 damage with Touch of Flame on, and then throwing 2 will also cause an ignition every time, which deals 32,497 additional damage. So a full 2 grenade combo hits for 185,819. Now, if we take all these values and apply the changes listed that I went over in the beginning of the video, we can see what everything will hit for when these changes go live. And keep in mind, I just applied these buffs / nerfs to everything. So in the case of something like Anarchy, the 20% increase might not count for something like the detonation at the very end. It shouldn't make a big difference overall, but that just comes down to how certain exotics have their damage coded. So keep that in mind. All special weapons in the kinetic slot got the 10% increase, so Izzy now hits for 110,000. RB, which also got a nerf of 15% because it is a linear, remains pretty similar, now at 41,257, and then Cartesian is still the same. Kata went down 15% to 59,000 with bait and switch active. Hothead received no damage changes because it's a rocket, and then once again, Sleeper was not changed either. Anarchy being increased by 20% puts it close to where it used to be when it was meta. 20 ticks across 2 bolts will now hit for 204,000 with some extra damage from the detonations, of course. Wendigo is also up 20%, so this will now hit at 43,000 at base, and then 62,000 with explosive light. Grand Overture, which is already the best burst DPS weapon in the game, will go up 10%. The base shot should hit for around 20.1 thousand, and the missiles at 18.8 thousand. And then lastly, fusion grenades should still remain the same, but I could see these getting nerfed before Lightfall as well. Now that we know the updated values each weapon tested will hit for, I want to go over the total damage output that each is capable of using just base reserves. Izzy holds 20 shots, which is 5 honed edge times 4 shots, so this is 554,000 damage. RB holds 20 in total, so this is easily going to beat Izzy at 825,000 total damage, and Cartesian holds 19, so that is pretty similar at 752,000. Moving on to heavy weapons, Cataclysmic has 20 shots at base, but this goes all the way up to 32 with 4th times the charm. So the output of this with bait and switch active is 1.897 million. With 7 rockets, assuming all ended up being explosive light, this would bring Hothead out to 812,966 damage, and then Sleeper with 13 shots would be sitting around 1.1 million. Anarchy holds 16 ammo, but obviously this is tick damage and harder to get everything off, but this would be 1.696 million damage on its own as passive damage, which is extremely good. Wendigo with 6x explosive light shots and the rest as base damage would be dealing 848,000. This is with 17 shots total. And then lastly, Grand Overture would be dealing 2.335 million damage. This is going to be with 60 base shots and then also 60 missiles. Lastly, for this video, I'm going to be going over DPS rotations that can be used and are pretty optimal to use. For this, I will be going over the total damage that each weapon is dealing, or the combination of the 2 weapons in a rotation, along with the duration that the damage took, which will be giving us our DPS value. Keep in mind, this might not use all the ammo for each weapon in a rotation, and these are different time intervals, making certain combos better for burst DPS and others better for sustained DPS. So make sure to take everything here with a grain of salt. Starting off with Cataclysmic, I ended up using Izinagi's Burden here for proccing bait and switch. This is going to be more optimal for total damage output, but definitely less optimal for DPS because of reloading honed edge each time. This takes 43.16 seconds in total for us to shoot off 3 mags, which is going to be 3 honed edge shots and then 30 linear shots. I simulated 4 times the charm here. And once again, this is with the 15% nerf values to linears. In total, this would have dealt almost 2.1 million damage, making our DPS value come out to 48.5 thousand, which is much lower than before the nerf, but still really solid for how much damage we're dealing in total. And also the 1 and 2 mag values are shown on screen, so for shorter DPS phases, linears are still gonna be solid. Using a rocket plus Izzy is going to end up being the best DPS rotation of everything I tested. This was 5 cycles of a honed edge shot and a rocket with Wolfpack rounds, dealing 1.297 million damage in just 18.22 seconds. This is about half the total damage of Cataclysmic, but dealt in less than half the total time, and we have 2 rockets to spare. At the end of this cycle, we had 71.2 thousand damage per second. Izigo, which is short for Izinagi's Burden, and Wendigo was actually comparable to Izzy Rocket. The 5 cycles of shooting Izzy and then 3 GL shots took slightly longer at just over 20 seconds. We dealt 1.32 million damage, so our DPS was at 63.3 thousand damage per second. Do note that we did only have 2 GL shots left though, which is not as much extra damage as having 2 rockets left over. So for the sake of ammo economy, I think that rockets are much better too, but you could also optimize getting ×9 explosive light to help with the damage here. Sleeper, on the other hand, still has pretty bad total damage output with just 13 shots. This is just 1.1 million damage. It takes 18.72 seconds to deal this, resulting in 59,000 damage per second after all shots are fired. Honestly, Sleeper doesn't seem to beat out any option for either DPS over any time interval or total damage output, so in my opinion, there's literally zero reason to run this. Anarchy and Cartesian is an option that I thought would end up being pretty good, especially since you could throw some extra grenades in here to increase your damage. Overall, this combo took just under 25 seconds to deal around 1.28 million damage. This makes it super bad for DPS, but again, Anarchy is a dot weapon, so assuming that you do spam special finishers, this actually isn't that bad of a method to use for damage when you have tankier bosses, if there aren't enemies to finish with Aeons. I did also want to note that for Anarchy damage, I equated this correctly by going off time. Since the 5th and 6th shots didn't deal their full damage potential, that extra damage was not included in these calculations. Grand Overture, which is hands down the best total damage option with these changes, actually kinda sucks. It was pretty comparable to Cataclysmic, where it takes a while to deal a lot of damage. Overall, this was 2.335 million damage in 54.3 seconds, and the DPS stays pretty similar across the board. If you were to front load the missiles in this, that would change everything, but it's hard to say if this will be doable against certain bosses. The main issue is just that the main firing mode is extremely slow. My rotation could have been slightly more optimized too, but either way, this weapon won't be the play unless there is an absolute drought for heavy ammo, or like I said, you somehow managed to get a good bit of ammo and could constantly have the missiles ready to go. I did make a full video on this showing how it is pretty insane when just using the missiles for burst DPS, so if we do end up getting another A-Track-like encounter, it still could be worth using. Lastly, we have Anarchy and Fusion Grenades. This deals pretty solid DPS and technically has nearly infinite total damage output. I had to test on the Grasp Ogre, but I am still using the damage values from the Lost Sector. Overall, this was 11 grenades thrown and 5 ignitions triggered. The boss went immune as I threw the 12th grenade, so I did not end up counting it. As it stands, this is great, dealing 1.55 million damage in just 26 seconds, but the main issue is Fusion Grenades will not receive the 25% damage increase from something like Well of Radiance, which most teams default to as their buff, nor will it work with Font of Might, which is a 22% damage increase next season. So even though this does look super good on paper, it will not be the play for your main damage source on day one, but it might be good for supplemental damage when you're out of ammo. The TLDR, if you end up taking anything away from this video, is as follows. Linears are still meta for longer damage phases where you need the ammo economy. Pretty much any damage phases longer than 20 seconds, similar to War Priest or Golgi, in this new raid will be optimal for linears still. Anything shorter than this will more than likely have you on Izzy plus rockets with someone on Galley, assuming you can continually get the ammo you need. And then for burst DPS, this highly changes depending on if it's a 3 second, 5 second, 8 second damage phase. You get the point, but I honestly think if you have the ammo, spamming rockets is gonna end up being the play, especially if you have a Hothead with Clown and Field Prep. I will still probably test some additional damage rotations out to find more optimal DPS rotations for next season, especially those that combine elemental affinities to optimize Font of Might. And do keep in mind, none of the swapping I did was done with Arbalest, which is technically better than Izzy if you can get in 3 shots before autoloading procs, and is just better for total damage too. Let me know your thoughts on the meta shift in the comments below, and once again, I do stream a ton over on Twitch, where we do low-mans and speedruns live. A link to that and my Discord server are both in the description below if you guys want to ask me questions over there. Anyways, that's all for this video. As always, have a good one. Peace.